Now, we cross live to New York to where our U.S. business correspondent, Christian Lee, is waiting to discuss all the latest making headlines in America. Christian, great to have you this hour. Now, the U.S. Federal Reserve is due to announce whether it would raise interest rates this evening. Christian, what are the expectations on the street? Will they or won't they?
The Federal Reserve is expected to raise interest rates today, but they may cut the number of hikes it anticipates next year and signal an earlier end to its monetary tightening in the face of financial market volatility and rising recession fears. Right now, it's about 8:30 a.m. in New York, and the central bank is due to announce its decision at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so in about just over 5 hours. Investors widely expect the Fed will lift borrowing costs by 0.25 percentage point to a range of between 2.25% and 2.5%. It would be the fourth rate hike of the year and the ninth since the central bank began its current tightening cycle in December 2015. Now, a rate hike could anger the White House. President Donald Trump has repeatedly attacked the Fed for raising rates this year, saying it was undercutting his efforts to boost the economy. Yesterday, Trump warned Fed policymakers not to make yet another mistake. The Fed's tightening is designed to reduce the monetary policy boost to a U.S. economy that is now growing much faster than central bank policymakers think it can sustain. But with the price of oil tumbling, economic growth in Europe and China slipping, and the fiscal stimulus from the Trump administration's $1.5 trillion tax cut package expected to fade, Fed policymakers appear ready to back away from their prior view that the economy could weather 3 more rate hikes next year. Economists expect that fresh Fed economic forecasts, also due to be released today, may suggest that 2 rate hikes is more likely. Meanwhile, traders of interest rate futures don't even think the Fed will manage 1 hike. With borrowing costs after today's expected rate hike close to, if not in, the broad range that Fed officials have identified as neutral for a healthy economy, policymakers are also likely to emphasize that future rate-setting decisions will hinge on new economic data. That may be particularly important as data pulls the central bank in different directions, with a strong labor market and robust output suggesting the need for higher rates, and a weaker global economy and U.S. bond yields suggesting not. To that end, economists say the Fed will likely modify or remove from its policy statement a reference to the likelihood that further gradual increases in its key overnight lending rate will be needed. Doing so would mark one more step in the Fed's march away from its reliance on forward guidance to shape market expectations in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. It could also help the central bank guard against criticism, whether from Trump or others, by allowing it to point to the economic realities on the ground as forcing its hand on any future rate hikes. Jane.
All right, Christian, anticipation around potential rate hikes by the Fed has always had a way of moving the market. So how are U.S. stocks doing today?
Sure. U.S. stock index futures climbing about 0.8% this morning. The Dow Jones, S&P, and NASDAQ look to be opening higher, potentially adding to a second day of gains. Investors are hopeful that the Federal Reserve will give them an early Christmas present by signaling fewer rate hikes given the turmoil in financial markets and rising fears of a recession. Fed fund futures are pricing in only 1 more rate rise next year. The latest Reuters poll showed economists expect 2 rate hikes, with the probability of a U.S. recession in the next 2 years jumping to 40%. A turbulent couple of months have pushed all 3 major U.S. indexes more than 10% below recent highs to what is known as correction territory, and that has sparked calls, including from President Donald Trump, for the Fed to hold fire. Adding to worries of an economic slowdown, FedEx, which is seen as a bellwether for the global economy, slashed its 2019 forecast, citing a weakening economy in Europe and slowdown in China. The stock is tumbling about 6% in pre-market trading and dragging rival United Parcel Service down with it. Micron Technology falling about 7% in pre-market trading after the chipmaker's quarterly results missed estimates due to weakening consumer and business demand for phones and computers. The results are expected to contribute to weakness in Pfizer is rising over 1% after a deal to combine its consumer health business with GlaxoSmithKline. On the macro front, data is expected to show the current account deficit for the third quarter widening to about $124 billion in the second quarter. And in just over an hour, a separate report is likely to show existing home sales for November fell from the previous month. Jane.
All right, so what's business without talking about the US-China trade war that has had great impact on emerging markets or markets in general? So what's the latest on trade talks between the world's top two economies?
Yes, the United States and China are clashing again at the World Trade Organization today, accusing each other of undermining the multilateral trading system, according to speeches from the closed-door talks seen by Reuters. U.S. Ambassador Denis Shea accused China of seeking to, quote, outright steal technology in strategic industries and dump its products on U.S. markets, saying this is not acceptable. China's envoy said that reckless actions by the Trump administration were the root of the crisis, but that China hoped that in the follow-up to their leaders' summit, the two powers can, quote, move in the same direction with mutual respect to contribute to the stability of the world economic and trade environment. And earlier today, China and the U.S. held a telephone call about trade and economic issues. According to China's Commerce Ministry, the call was at a vice ministerial level. So there are ongoing talks being made. Now, if you'll recall, in December, President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, agreed to stop escalating tit-for-tat tariffs that have disrupted the flow of hundreds of billions of dollars of goods between the world's two biggest economies. Since then, Beijing has resumed buying U.S. soybeans, the single largest agricultural export between the two countries. China has also cut tariffs on imports of cars from the U.S., dialed back on an industrial development plan known as Made in China 2025, and told its state refiners to buy more U.S. oil. Trump took those as signs that, quote, China wants to make a big and very comprehensive deal. The U.S. has welcomed Chinese concessions, but trade experts and people familiar with negotiations say Beijing needs to do far more to meet U.S. demands for long-term change in how China does business. A hard deadline for a trade deal has been set for March 1st by the U.S. Jane.
All right, and while the U.S. tries to broker a deal with China, they're also on Korean Peninsula working towards denuclearization. So what's the progress being made on that front?
Yes, well, U.S. officials saying today they will try to expedite humanitarian aid in North Korea as Washington and Pyongyang struggle to find a breakthrough in stalled talks aimed at ending the North's nuclear program. Stephen Biegun, the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, made the announcement as he arrived in Seoul. He's there for 4 days of talks with South Korean officials. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed to work towards denuclearization at his landmark summit with President Donald Trump in June, but the two sides have since made little progress. With Washington doubling down on sanctions enforcement, humanitarian aid for North Korea has nearly ground to a halt this year, despite warnings from aid groups of a potential food crisis and improving relations with Pyongyang. International sanctions imposed over North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile programs technically do not cover humanitarian activities. And over the summer, the United Nations adopted a U.S. proposal designed to streamline approval for aid shipments. But UN agencies say strict interpretations of UN sanctions curtailing banking and shipping transactions with Pyongyang, as well as a travel ban for U.S. citizens, have effectively shut down the North Korean operations of most relief groups. Biegun told reporters in Seoul that the U.S. will work with the UN in reviewing how it grants sanctions exemptions for aid and how American aid workers can mobilize amid a travel ban to North Korea. Trump has said a second summit with Kim Jong-un is likely to take place in January or February, though he wrote on Twitter last week that he is in no hurry. Jane.
All right, finally, Christine, billionaire tech mogul Elon Musk seemed to have yet another trick up his sleeve. He has just revealed, or rather unveiled, his first Los Angeles tunnel, which I think is quite impressive. Now, what can you tell us about this project and how will it relieve heavy traffic problem in the city.
Yes, Elon Musk made a brief public appearance to unveil the first tunnel completed by the underground transit venture he launched 2 years ago. And it's meant to be an ambitious remedy to the LA area's infamously heavy traffic. But contrary to some of his own hype from several months ago, free rides were not part of the grand opening. Musk touted the newly finished nearly 2-kilometer tunnel segment as a breakthrough in low-cost, fast-digging technology being pioneered by his new tunneling firm, The Boring Company. Musk has advertised the tunnel as a first step toward developing a high-speed subterranean network capable of whisking cars and people at up to 150 miles per hour. But such a system still has a long way to go. The new tunnel was excavated along a path that runs near LA in the adjacent municipality of Hawthorne, where Musk's Boring Company and his SpaceX rocket firm are both headquartered. Musk launched his foray into public transit after complaining on Twitter 2 years ago that LA's traffic was driving him nuts, and then promising to build a boring machine and just start digging. Musk put the total price tag for the finished segment at about $10 million. By comparison, he said digging a mile of tunnel by traditional engineering methods costs up to about $1 billion and takes 3 to 6 months to complete. When fully operational, the underground loop system, as Musk envisions it, will consist of passenger and automobile-carrying platforms called skates that can zip through the tunnels by way of electric power once they descend into the underground network. If successful, the Hawthorne Tunnel is envisioned as eventually connecting to a network of other tunnels yet to be built. Jane.
Right. All right, then thank you so much, Christian Lee from New York on Global Business Report.